So hi, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I'm so excited that you're here with us. And it is my pleasure and honor to introduce to you one of our esteemed experts in the realm of test prep. It would be easier to tell you what he doesn't do versus what he does do. He has been one of our leading test prep instructors since 2008 here at the Princeton Review. And I'm so excited that you have the opportunity to hear him speak all about the AP English test that's going to be rolling around in just a few short months. Please feel free to participate. If you have questions, you can go ahead and throw them in the chat and we'll make sure that those get answered. We want to make sure that everybody here comes away with what they came here to get. And so without any further ado, Ken, over to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And I really appreciate everyone being here this evening. We are hoping that we can sort of give you an overview of what to expect on the two different AP English exams. And along the way, I'm going to try to pause as often as I can for questions. And if I miss any, Kelsey will be sure to call them out. Again, thank you. And like she said, let's get started. Tonight, we have sort of three core pieces to our presentation. In case, just so everyone is sort of coming from the same background, we're going to begin with why in the world people take AP exams to really contextualize why we're doing this presentation. Then we're going to talk about understanding the core structure of what's on the two AP English exams and sort of what they test and how they test. And then we're going to go into some strategies you can use for the multiple choice and the writing parts of the exams. So thank you for being here on this journey. And let's jump right into that very first module. The best thing about AP exams by a mile is that you can earn college credit for them. Now, we're going to break the details on that in a moment, but most of the time, the number one benefit to doing these tests is you are basically showing to a college that you have a level of competency in a subject at a college level, and you are effectively able to place out of needing to take that course in college. So let's talk about how that works. You may or may not know that the AP exams, including the English ones, are scored on a scale of 1 to 5. You earn credit for a score of 3 or higher, though it should be noted that at very competitive schools, you may need 4 or higher. But 3 is sort of like, in College Board's eyes, the people who make the APs, that is, 3 is proving that you have like a college level mastery or competency of the material. In addition, that credit that you get for the 3 or higher can be used for required courses. So you may or may not know this. You may be sitting there and saying, "Oh man, I can't wait to college. I can't wait to get to college and do environmental science like right away, or to do law right away." Well, when you get to college, your first 2 years are often the same courses that you took in junior and senior year of high school. You have almost 2 years worth of what are called your core classes. Every single AP you take and get a 3 or higher in that matches up with a core class, you get to skip that core class. You don't have to do it for that college. Hence, you get to skip your introductory classes, which means you get to your major faster and graduate sooner. At some point in college, you're choosing a major and you're probably doing some fascinating thing. Well, you would love if more of your time at college was based on that subject area. And additionally, if you can wrangle 4, 5, 6 APs together, well, that's an entire semester of college, if you want to, that you could potentially drop, and you could graduate sooner if your goal is to be working in your field that quickly. So you, of course, can't earn the credit if you don't know when the exams are offered. In this year, 2026, the AP English Lit exam will be Wednesday, May 6th in the morning session. There's a morning and an afternoon testing time for each exam. The AP Lang exam will be exactly 1 week later to the minute on Wednesday, May 13th in the morning. Something that you should know is that both of the exams are fully digital this year. And that means you're going to be doing the multiple choice portion and the written portion in College Board's Blue Book app. If you've never downloaded the Blue Book app, I highly recommend that you download it onto the device that you're going to use. So that could be laptop or tablet. I almost said desktop. Don't bring that with you. You can bring a laptop or a tablet, and basically you take the exam on your device, and you don't even need to have like permanent internet access. As long as it has internet access for the initial download, and is able to reconnect at some point, everything's happening inside of the app. So even if your school loses service, everything is saved safely inside of the secure testing app. If you've done a digital SAT before, you're already familiar with Blue Book, though some of you may not be there. But do know that this is, unless you get some accommodation, this is the only modality the exam is delivered. You're not able to do like an old paper version of the test. Okay, so we know our dates. We also should understand a little bit about how the exams are scored. I mentioned before that they're scored on a 1 to 5 scale, and that 3 was competent. And you can see that at that level, you're called qualified, and it's like the equivalent of getting a B minus, a C plus, or a C in college. It might not be the highest grade, but it's enough to show that you understand the course. As you can see, a 4 is very well qualified, and a 5 is extremely well qualified. And certainly, not as you probably can imagine, the higher the score, even better for credit, but also the higher the score and grade in the resulting course, the better that can look from an admissions perspective. So we certainly want to, not just challenge ourselves with these programs, but also do well in them. So that's our first segment. Look at that, right? We're already a third of the way done. But as we go and we build more, things will slow down a little bit. That being said, of the few slides I've given you so far, I encourage all of you to type questions in the chat at any time that you have them. And if I miss them, Kelsey will call them out to me. Does anyone have any questions on the earth-shattering mountain of information I've already given you? Don't worry, more is coming. Go ahead and type, and again, Kelsey will let me know. So let's look at that second segment, understanding the AP English exams. Although there are some similarities in the exam structure, there are differences, and you wouldn't want to even really begin prepping if you didn't have a good understanding of what you're going to be up against. So first, using College Board's own words, the purpose of an AP exam is to show competency in the material covered by an introductory college course in the exam subject. So these exams aren't showing that you are ready to be a master of English language or of English literature. They are saying that if you took an introductory English literature course or an introductory English grammar course in college, that you would handle it just fine. But the thing we have to understand about that is that the people who write the AP exams, the College Board, they don't know what you studied in your English courses. They don't know how deep your teacher went into grammar or vocab or what books your course covered. So what they have to do is they have to standardize everything. They've got to zoom out a little bit and ask questions that a student doing either of these courses would reasonably have a good chance of knowing the answer to. So what they do is they don't test specifics, they test big ideas. Here are the big ideas for AP English Lang. First, rhetorical situation. And I'll put them all up here and talk about them briefly, but rhetorical situation is in a given circumstance, what rhetorical device was used and how was it used to sort of further the argument in that passage? Claims and evidence. What was the argument made by the author, and what specific examples or pieces of information were cited to further that claim? Reasoning and organization. How was the passage organized, and why did the author make the choices they make to include or not include certain things? And finally, writing style. what was the perspective of the passage? What was their sort of general tone that they used in order to craft their to um, include in their story? So you'll notice none of these are what was the purpose of the dialogue in the 17th chapter of Great Expectations. They could be applied to any passage written by almost anyone. Let's switch things over and look at AP English Lit. The big ideas here are: who are the characters and their motivations? What's the setting of the story? What structure does the story follow? Who's the narrator? Do they have knowledge of everything or just themselves? What figurative language was used to help build the world? And finally, how can I use examples from literature to further some type of argument? So these are, we absolutely will, Shima. I see your question. That is coming in, improving your score. For now, we're just laying the groundwork. So again, what piece of literature doesn't have these things, right? They've generalized it to make it work for pretty much everything. Basically, any question or essay in either of these tests is testing you on one or potentially more of these big ideas, 4 for Lang and 6 for Lit. So let's get a little bit more specific. As I mentioned, the exams have some similarities. And by the way, do make sure that any materials you use are from 2025 or newer, because both exams now have 4 answers as of last testing cycle, rather than 5. So if you get an older book, you're going to have one too many answers to deal with. So the way this breaks down is each exam opens with section 1. And section 1 is always 45% of your grade. That you're going to have 60 minutes for section 1. And in AP English Lang, there are 55 multiple choice. And in AP English Lit, there are 45 multiple choice, just because the Lit questions tend to be a little bit more involved, but they're very similar. And then you'll go to section 2. And here's where the 2 exams have a little bit more of a difference. In both cases, section 2 is 55% of your grade. In AP Lang, you're going to get 3 essays: synthesis, rhetorical analysis, and argument. In synthesis, you are going to be presented with a variety of viewpoints, and your job is going to be, as the name implies, to synthesize them together, to create some type of cogent argument using the viewpoints provided. In rhetorical analysis, you are going to be given someone else's speech or argument, and you are going to break down what were the main lines of reasoning and what rhetorical devices or literary devices were used to further that argument with examples. And in an argument essay, this is about your ability to really write. You're given a very general prompt where you're going to write and take a side on some issue. Notice that Lang gives you a 15-minute reading period because you need to be able to read the passage someone else wrote or the perspectives other people have. In Lit, it's the same amount of time with no reading period, because there isn't nearly as much outside stuff to consider. Poetry analysis is similar to rhetorical analysis. It's specific to a poem. Prose fiction is like rhetorical analysis, but it's with a written story, a piece of literature. And literary argument is like the argument essay, except you're going to need to cite specific examples from literature to back up your point. So that is a brief overview. We're not going to cover the ins and outs of every essay in our time tonight. So our main segment tonight, where we're going to spend easily the most amount of time, is on this last module. This is where all of the practice examples are and where we're really going to start cluing you into our strategy. Rosangeli, you're asking, are you muted? I think on default, We are generally like want everyone to use the public chat. Otherwise, it's 43 people talking about AP English, Lang and Lit at once. And that sounds exciting. I mean, that sounds like a great party to me, but it's going to breed more chaos than order. So if you do have a question, definitely just send it in the public chat and we will make sure that we get to it. All right, so preparing for the AP English exams. So we have our basics. We know that we're going to be assessed somehow on these 4 to 6 big ideas. We know that we've got a bunch of multiple choice to do in an hour. We know that we've got 3 essays to write in 2 hours. What we're here for tonight is to take what we've learned in these first 2 modules and apply it to the questions themselves. So let's jump into it. Because almost half of your grade is based on the multiple choice, 45%, you need to understand that you do not need to be able to know one single correct answer on these tests. What you need to be able to do is eliminate the 3 flawed answers using the process of elimination. And I can demonstrate to you just how powerful that is. If I were to ask the group, what is the capital of Malawi? Without Googling, no one open up a browser tab. Very few of you are going to shoot in the public chat, I know, because it's a very specific geography question and not a country you would have come across unless you have family from there or you've studied it or you just watched some random TikTok. But if I make it a multiple choice problem, everybody could get the answer now. People can throw in the chat, what is all of a sudden the answer to this multiple choice question? Type the letter that you think it is. And Maham, I see your question. I'll get to it. All of a sudden, everybody is throwing in D. Whereas nobody was a geography expert 30 seconds ago, everybody knows the answer now. What changed? You can see there are now 4 answers that you know are not the capital of Malawi. Because we know it's not Paris or London or Amsterdam. We've heard of those places. I admit there's no geography on AP Lang or AP Lit, but there's questions that are so bizarre that they might as well be. And so you want to be a master of understanding what is in your passage and what 3 answers are not consistent with what you can actually see in your passage. That being said, sometimes you aren't going to know enough to eliminate the 3 wrong answers. Maybe you're reading and rereading the question and you simply can't really understand what you're being asked. Or maybe the question's about the entire passage and you don't really think you have the time to understand the passage that well. Whenever we can't get rid of all the answers or we don't think a question is worth a lot of time, we want to use a skill called letter of the day. And here's the thing. Let me just open up my annotate tool and show you guys something. If I, on one of these exams, were to bubble truly randomly, like over here, there's an issue. 2 issues, actually. One is if I bubble randomly, I might accidentally not get a single one of my random guesses right. It's unlikely, it's very unlikely, but it's possible. The bigger problem, if you're taking a random guess, it's a problem you shouldn't be working on. And sitting there and thinking about what that random guess should be is eating away from the time from the problems you can do. So instead, we recommend you choose a letter like A, B, C, or D before your exam starts. And for every problem you get stuck on or don't have time to do, you throw in the same letter. Mathematically, it's actually mathematically the same, but it's not the same when the scores come out. When the scores come out, the people who letter of the day score higher because they didn't waste their most valuable non-renewable resource, which was time, on problems they shouldn't have been bothering. So make sure you choose a letter of the day before the exam starts and that you fill it in for every multiple choice problem you aren't going to do. Any questions so far on POE or on letter of the day? POE, process of elimination. Muhammad asked, I'm self-studying for both tests this year. Are there any good resources or any books I should read? Now, my answer is going to surprise you, given that this is a Princeton review and tutor.com presentation. I highly stand behind the Princeton Review, AP English Lang, and AP English Lit books. I'm just going to grab one of them that I happen to have nearby. So this, we probably have even a new edition out now. Ooh, that won't show. There we go. These books are awesome because we actually update them every single year, or like occasionally we update them every time there's a big change. And they typically come with access to anywhere between 5 to 8 practice tests. And the way they're built, Maham, is they're built for someone who is going from knowing nothing to trying to master everything. So they will literally open with the same background I've given you today, and they will build and build and build. So the Lang and the Lit books are really a good starting point. Other than that, the next place I'm so glad to hear, Shima, that you have a positive experience with the book and that Maham has the Lit one already. And that is true. You're under no obligation to buy these things. They're often in like the reference area of your library. That one more thing, remember these exams are made through College Board. So any prep either on College Board site or through Khan Academy, those work if you're looking for additional practice problems. So I'd start with Princeton Review. They're the best, no joke. But then the official resources are the next place I would go. And usually you'll be able to find practice banks for problems on those sites. Okay. Now, yeah, you're welcome. Let me clear this. I always have to clear my annotations each time, but let's start with a problem that you could see on either exam, but this particular problem, so you know, is from the AP English Lang test. And I want to just explain how you should be handling these multiple choice questions. So the question says, the term taxa in paragraph 1 refers to. You might notice that I started with the question and not the passage. It's really critical that we as test takers understand that you must know what you're being asked to do before you just randomly read. You're not being asked to understand anything about species conservation or legal protections for endangered species. You're just being asked to understand what taxa is. And so, what the very first thing you should do is, yes, you should then read your passage. So you can read this, but I'll read it out as well. Management objectives will differ substantially among species and thus influence habitat monitoring objectives. Emphasis species for which habitat may be monitored may come from a wide spectrum of conservation categories, from taxa listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act to ubiquitous species that may be hunted or trapped. When I look in the passage, it's not like I want to understand every word. I want to understand some information that will help me know what taxa is. And if I look here, they say that I go from taxa listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act to ubiquitous species that may be hunted or trapped. Well, wait a minute. If we're talking about it goes from taxa to ubiquitous species that may be hunted or trapped, then it sounds like taxa is something to do with species. And it says that they can come from a wide spectrum of conservation categories. So from the text, I know that taxa is something to do with how species are categorized in this act. That is not something I had to make up. That is right there. And in Blue Book, you are able to highlight text and even make annotations. Additionally, for POE, you can cross off answers. So let's look. A, characteristics of a group of organisms that distinguish them from other group. None of my highlighting says that I'm talking about characteristics. I'm just talking about groupings of species in this act. B, criteria used to determine whether a species is endangered. They did talk about endangered species, but they never said this is like a list of criteria. It's just categorizing species. C, a grouping of a certain species of organisms. Well, categories are groupings, and I know that taxa is like something to do with species, so I'll keep C. D, the unusually frail members of a larger group of animals who would likely not survive without habitat support. Nothing in. I understand that there are endangered species, but nothing about my highlighting says taxa specifically means D. And finally, any group of widespread and thriving organisms. It's not any group, it's specifically groups that are categorized in this act. And so the right answer, we hope, should be C. What I want everyone to realize is you aren't actually being tested on your ability to deeply understand what's going on in each paragraph, whether it's Lang or Lit. You're being tested on your ability to find information in the passage that supports one answer as being correct and one answer as being wrong. And remember, you wouldn't even have to deal with 5 answers here because there's only 4 of them on your test. Demonstrating with what would be a harder, older question to just show how this would work anyway. Any questions about how we did this first example here? Note also that I did not need to read that entire passage. I only put one paragraph of it here because we specifically don't need all of it for many of the questions. So let's clear those drawings and keep moving. The way to interact with the passage itself is, again, not to read every word, but to read actively. And that means that as you look at every paragraph on Lang or on Lit, you want to understand 3 things. First, what was the main point of the paragraph? Not all the details. Second, what relation does this paragraph have to what came before? And third, what is likely to come up next? So going back to our previous slide, folks, I know that because of how this begins, I know that they probably talked about management objectives because here they're talking about how they differ substantially. And I know that next they're probably going to talk about circumstances where they might pull from the endangered group or circumstances that they might pull from like the ubiquitous ones that are allowed to be hunted. Maybe they're going to go more into what an emphasis species is. And I know the main idea is talking about where these emphasis species might come from when they're choosing what to monitor. So I can learn a lot about the passage structure just by asking, what's the main point? How does it connect to what came before? And where are we likely headed? What I don't need to understand is the meaning of every last word in the story. When you complete your initial scan of each paragraph, you just need to ask, why did the author write the passage? So in other words, what was the main idea and what did the author want to communicate about it? Then, what did the author do? Were they trying to convince me of something? Were they just trying to get me interested about something? Or were they trying to make it so that I would like disagree with some idea presented in the passage? And finally, what impact would this have on readers who lived when it was written? And how did the author achieve that effect? You would not spend a long time on these questions, simply asking, why did the author write the passage? What was the author trying to do? And what impact would have had? That is going to be enough to guide you on what you'll see in a moment are like big picture questions. Exactly, right? Like what was the purpose of the passage? What was the message the author was intending to convey? Remember that every single question is giving you an incredibly specific task. No question just asks, tell me something true based on the passage. Every question has a goal, and your job is to make sure first you understand what that goal is. When you do go into the passage, you always want to read not just the lines the question refers to, as many of them do, but also the before and the after. So on the blue book, a question might refer to a highlighted sentence. You want to make sure that you at least read the sentence before and after that as well, because I can't really understand why a highlighted sentence was included if I don't understand either what led to that sentence or where they went after that sentence. When you do find the needed evidence, remember that you should always begin by asking which answers are wrong. You shouldn't start by asking for the right answer because it's going to lead you to justify things that things that don't have good support. So that's a very important. You'll notice when I did my highlighting before, I wasn't trying to say C was right. I was pointing out things about A, B, D, and E that don't match what I highlighted. And that is always how you apply POE. Only if you're stuck between two answers or maybe three answers might you say which one of these is the best match. But the spirit should always be eliminating the flaws. At the bottom line of this is process of elimination helps us be accurate and avoid errors. Letter of the day helps us avoid wasting time on too difficult of a problem. And the two-pass system is immediately eliminate anything that doesn't match your highlighting, and only then compare the remaining answers to each other to look for a flaw. What you should not do is weigh the four answers against each other without anything highlighted or marked up in the passage itself. The two-pass system also applies to your overall progress through the section. So let's understand that. Within each passage, we think you should answer the easy questions, and if any questions are hard, put in your letter of the day. And the Blue Book test lets you actually mark problems. Once you've answered all the easy questions on each passage, you then should tackle as many of the hard ones for the time you have left. If you try to do every question in every passage when you first see it, you're going to spend so much time on the first passage or two that you don't have any time for the last passage. And yes, so Shima asked the question, can you highlight on the actual AP exam? So the Blue Book software, right, absolutely allows you to highlight. And generally, and I think it allows you even to change your color. And the tools are available both in multiple choice and in free response. Free response, it's great. It means you can like highlight important parts of the passage that you're doing the rhetorical analysis for to really keep track of your examples. Okay, so here's a sample reading passage. Now, for the time, for where we are on the clock, I won't do this entire passage because we have other things to look at. But I want to just show you what you're going to be looking at. And keep in mind, on the Blue Book, you'll get a passage on the left side of the screen and one question at a time on the right. And the passage will be reproduced for every single question you would have. So here, I get what we call the blurb, some background information that AP thinks you need to understand what was going on. You should take a quick moment to scan this before you begin reading. And then you're going to see that I have a series of paragraphs. And again, we're not going to read every last one of them. But the first paragraph is that same paragraph you already saw. And I can see that they're going to talk about management objectives, and they explain that the objectives change based on the species. And that's going to produce different monitoring objectives. So what does the next paragraph talk about? It talks about what the process for identifying different monitoring priorities is. And while I can read, all I really need to understand is that that's going to change based on which agencies or organizations are involved. And since they end by talking about the Forest Service, they're probably going to talk about forests in some way in the in that very next area. Sorry, I was trying to put a pointer on that for you guys, although I think people are following. And sure enough, in paragraph 3, they're talking about regional and forest management objectives. And then, since they talk about sort of what they do that is correct, they then talk about what doesn't make a good candidate for habitat monitoring, and so on and so forth. And you'll notice that occasionally, as you see up here with biological considerations, the passage will be broken up a little bit into sort of different little subsections. So now we're going to switch a little bit and talk a little bit more directly about how the environment might sort of impact habitat and species monitoring. And then lastly, you'll usually have some footnotes when relevant. Basically, College Board makes sure that anything they write is like properly backed up and cited. So then there's a series of problems here, and I certainly we could do many of them, but I want to at least show you a couple before we move on. So number one, the author's main purpose in this excerpt is to, you may benefit from holding off on these main purpose questions until the end. You've only looked for main ideas and connections so far. So while we probably have a good idea as to what this answer is, we might instead want to start with something more specific. 2 is a great starting point because it only wants to know, what does paragraph 4 imply? In other words, what's paragraph 4 suggest without directly stating it? Let's find out. If we go to paragraph 4, so 1, 2, 3, 4, it's this conversely one. Again, I want to see, I can just put a mark next to that. It says, conversely, an emphasis species associated with habitat that is not likely to be influenced by planned management actions may be a poor candidate Sorry, I see it cuts off there. It says maybe a poor candidate for habitat monitoring. I'm sorry, this is third paragraph. Excuse me, folks. There we go. I was wondering why that was cut off there. So it says habitat monitoring should focus primarily on species that are most likely to respond to changes in habitat condition because of management actions, disturbances, or climate change. In particular, so that seems helpful, management actions may impact systems in ways that are detrimental or positive, but remain uncertain and require monitoring. Thus, selecting emphasis species should include not only those that are associated with forest plan objectives or desiring conditions, but also those that have the potential to be effective by management actions that modify habitat. So you'll notice I chose to focus on the last idea because of the word thus. Thus is a great indicator that in Lang or Lit, the author has sort of gotten to the main point. Apparently, when you choose your emphasis species, you can't just pick it based on the species that best match the objectives of your plan or the conditions you're trying to create. For instance, maybe you're trying to promote tree growth in a forest, so you focus on a bird species known for distributing seed. But your monitoring also needs to emphasize species that are going to be affected by what you do to help the bird species out. So all I need to do here is choose something consistent with that. And so if I look, resources available for habitat monitoring are limited. Well, they might be, but my paragraph wasn't talking about limited resources. B, forest management programs focus only on the physical environment. No, the whole point was that they should focus on more, not something that they should be restricted on. The impact of forest management programs cannot be predicted. That might be true, but the whole point is that they're encouraging you to think about what other species your plan might affect. Forest management programs include climate change. They talk about that, but the point here wasn't that they're just about climate change. The point here was that you can't just monitor the species you want to. And so E is incredibly consistent with what we slided. Kelsey, I think you and your team probably work on this, but I know usually we make the slides available. I'm sure we can do that.
Yep, there will be a follow-up email sent out to everybody who registered.
Amazing. And so on this one, that was Shima's question. The answer is for sure E. So I want everyone to see this. They might have asked a question, a weird one, like, what does this imply or suggest? But that, don't get fooled by that. The answer, let me back up, needed to be in black and white. And I hope everyone understands that the author using the word thus means they're finally getting to their point. But not only that, the author using the word but means that there is a contradiction or at least a contrast. And if the paragraph makes a contrast, the right answer, notably, will include that contrast as well. And for certain, it did. Should not be confined only to one species type. So you have this immense power. Shima, let me that is something that I will need to do, but I can absolutely work on that and make sure that that's like a with answers copy that Kelsey and team can make sure is sent out.
You can also rewatch the recording.
That this is also true. Let's look at another specific question then. The last sentence of paragraph 2 suggests that. Well, again, I don't need to read the whole story. I just need the last sentence of paragraph 2. I'm not only going to read that because I need to know a little bit of context, but I'm not going to read everything. I'll start about here. Under these circumstances, compare habitat monitoring results periodically with population data to ensure that the assumed relationship between habitat and population remains. The indirect nature of the monitoring program relative to the link between habitat populations must always be considered. And I apologize that this is like cut off with the screen share. When the resulting monitoring data, I don't even need to keep going. It's fine that it's cut off because there's a pretty direct appeal that you need to understand that the monitoring program, right, has some relationship to habitats and populations when you're looking at the monitoring data. So if you look here at these options, we didn't even have a whole paragraph. It actually doesn't matter. Readers must consult the Forest Service if they want to monitor habitats for endangered species. Um, it if I look here, right? Let me just see if I can't go back a little bit. Um, this whole paragraph is talking about that you need to compare habitat monitoring results periodically with population data to ensure the assumed relationship remains. And that the indirect nature of the monitoring program relative to the link between habitat and populations must always be considered. My answer then really needs to deal with the concept of population data and habitat in connection to the monitoring program. So if you look, readers must consult the forest. Nowhere here does the author say, whoops, geez, I just see that it says paragraph 2. I am sorry, guys. The cutoff nature is what was throwing me off there. Oof. Let's speed that up, and I apologize for that. Here we go. Others commit the Forest Service to monitor habitat. Memoranda of understanding what state wildlife agencies obligate the Forest Service to assist with monitoring populations of important game species. So there we go. Memoranda of understanding with state wildlife agencies obligate the Forest Service to assist with monitoring populations of important game species. That's making way more sense. So now, for anyone who is confused, this should all be cleared up, right? If we look, no, there's no point of action for readers here. The Forest Service requires state wildlife agencies to include it in monitoring game species populations. That looks possible. The Forest Service must be involved in population monitoring for certain game species. Whoa, those look similar. Permission must be obtained from the Forest Service before game populations are monitored. And the Forest Service demands control. Well, that one is way too extreme. It doesn't say that they demand control. So remember, if you have multiple answers that seem to fit your evidence, you want to sort of compare the answers to each other. So if we look here really quickly, it says others commit the Forest Service to monitor habitat. In other words, others they ask or they bring in the Forest Service. The Forest Service is obligated to assist. This is why reading above your window matters. Because if you read only the last sentence, you might not catch that it's others involving the Forest Service, not the Forest Service saying they have to be brought in. So therefore, there we go. If I look now knowing that A and E are wrong, the Forest Service does not require the state agencies to include it in monitoring game species. But there are certain situations where the Forest Service is going to be involved. And again, there's nothing about permission. There are these circumstances, these others, where the Forest Service is brought in. And so you see here that all of these answers might seem similar, but only one of them matches that there are circumstances where the Forest Service is brought in. And lastly, and then we'll move forward because I'm keeping an eye on the clock here. Now that we have, a brief understanding of the passage, the general questions can be handled by POE. What is the author's main purpose in the excerpt? A, to encourage professionals to adopt a monitoring approach that is similar to the Forest Service's approach. The author doesn't ever say, doesn't spend the whole passage talking about the Forestry Service. Instead, they talk about the different considerations you have to have when monitoring habitat. B, influencing habitat monitoring professionals to monitor populations too. This is possible because several times they are saying that you need to pay careful attention to population, that you can't just think about your goals. B, this passage is not just about bird populations. D, educate readers about how to monitor wildlife habitats. This author is not trying to explain to readers how you would do it. And E, direct resources towards protecting endangered species. This isn't just about endangered species. It's about how you need to not just monitor the habitat of the species you want to monitor, you need to monitor other species as well in accordance with your plan. So we didn't do a whole lot of reading, but we are able to still get that answer. Now, with where we are time wise, I do want to move things forward, although there are more passages included on these slides. So let me move just a bit forward. But even if we were doing lit, nothing would change in our approach. I would still focus on the specific questions first, and then I would worry about the general questions. So, what about these essays? What tips in the time that we have could I give you? First, regardless of the essay, you need to understand the prompt. You probably know that AP essays are graded on a rubric, and all of them award a point basically for making sure the prompt was responded to appropriately. It's a little bit more involved than that, but that's the basics of it. Second, take a position. No matter how neutral you feel about the topic, what you present must be a defensible argument. In other words, you need to take an actual side or make an actual claim. A lot of times, people will give an opinion without actually turning it into an argument. For example, I like school dress codes. Weird, I know. That's not a position, it's an opinion. When you say, I believe that school dress codes help students focus on academics and avoid distractions, that is a position. Don't conflate an opinion with having an argument or a thesis. And lastly, make sure your essay is organized. If your essay doesn't follow an organized structure, it is not going to achieve the highest possible score in the rubric, no matter how well it's written. One of the points in the rubric, more or less, is did you organize the thing? So, in AP English Lang, you have synthesis, rhetorical analysis, argument. Now, I spoke about these earlier. Remember, you get 3 to 6 or 7 short viewpoints, and you have to use a number of them in one cohesive essay. I told you already, rhetorical analysis analyzes someone else's argument or speech. The argument essay is your own argument or speech with examples from your own knowledge, experience, or reading. Here's the basic structure that all essays on Lang or Lit should follow. One, an introductory sentence or two that captures the reader's attention, a hook. You should not just mutedly go right into the prompt. If you were asked to analyze a speech a politician made in the 1960s, let's say you're looking at President Kennedy's advocacy for the space program, it's a pretty famous speech. You might say something like, it can be argued that the first Apollo rocket was launched not by NASA, but by John F. Kennedy's impassioned enthusiasm on this date in 1961. You are not yet getting into your thesis. You are giving something interesting that captures the reader's attention. The average AP grader looks at so many Lang or Lit essays in a given day that anything that says this essay will stand out is pretty critical. The very second sentence or third must be your thesis. And as I mentioned, it must be debatable. So someone else needs to come and say, I disagree. And it needs to be narrow enough to be covered in a short essay and to be an argument and not just a broad opinion. Second to last, you should reference the three pieces of evidence you're going to use in the essay. That could be the sources you're going to use in a synthesis essay, the literature excerpts you're going to use in the literary argument essay, or in the three analysis essays: rhetorical analysis, prose fiction analysis, and poetry analysis. The main lines of reasoning that were present in the speech, or the main literary devices used by the author in the poem or the story. What am I really saying? I'm saying that right in your intro, the reader should know what your two or three body paragraphs will be about. Sophie asks, how many sentences are too long of an introduction? There's no hard limit, but I'll tell you this. If your introduction is longer than 4 sentences, I would bet you're repeating something unnecessarily. So, Sophie, introductory hook, a single sentence thesis, a single sentence with your pieces of evidence, and then a transition to the body of your essay. So you can start by saying, for instance, among all of these lines of reasoning, nothing resonated more with the audience than Kennedy's use of Kennedy's use of analogy to help the audience understand the importance of the space program. I might even be able to argue that you could get that down to 3, because the list of the 3 pieces of evidence will pretty naturally transition to talking about the first one. So 3 sentences, Sophie, 4, maybe 5, but I think the best advice I could give you, make sure every sentence is doing a unique job and that no sentence is repeating a previous one. Does that make sense? Cool. Six or more sentences, you've probably written more sentences than you need to. In each body paragraph, you should open with what your piece of evidence is, and if you are citing something that's already written, so a source, an argument, a poem, a story, you should give a clear reference to what evidence you're referring to. Or if you're writing your own argument essay, you should clearly give the details of the literary work or piece of personal experience you're referencing in. But I need to highlight this so much. What everybody who writes these essays is missing is they never explain why it supports their thesis. So they give an example of a book, they tell you the stories of their book, but they forget to tie it back to what their argument actually was and why the specifics of that support the argument. You need to say, for example, that if you do the dress code thing, you need to say having people of all genders wear the exact same uniform reduces potential conflict from misgendering or from a clashing of personal tastes. and creates a more cohesive community where everyone can be treated as an individual, because in a weird way, they are not demonstrating their individuality. You need to actually explain why that example you gave supports your point. And you need to do this for 3 body paragraphs. You can do it in 2, but if you only use 2 body paragraphs, then the paragraphs must be incredibly strong. And here's one last thing people forget on these essays: a conclusion. You've just taken all the time to strongly support an essay. A conclusion takes your thesis and takes it from here's an argument I will make to here's an argument I made and you should now be convinced of. So you can get pretty dramatic in the thesis, in the conclusion. You can say, for the reasons I've enumerated, for creating a stronger sense of community, avoiding the distractions created by personal style, and allowing for a greater emphasis on education. A dress code in a school is the very opposite of a restrictive policy. In many ways, it could be said to allow a student more chances to be an individual academic and learn who they are than clothing choice ever could. It should have a level of drama to it, no matter which of the 6 essays we are referring to. We see too often that conclusions are missing, or that conclusions are right, or that they I'm sorry, that they aren't nearly as dramatic as they should be. So the slide deck here certainly has more information, which is why it's so important you're getting a copy of the slides. It's going to give you all types of different ways to master. Like, you'll get another example passage. We'll talk a little bit more about lit specific stuff. But what everyone needs to know as we wrap up here is, sure, you need to know a couple of things about how authors make arguments for Lang and for lit. And for lit, you need to know a little bit more when it comes to rhetorical and literary devices. But at the core of it, the AP exams are still standardized tests. Those passages on Lang and lit could be conquered by anyone who knew how to beat a standardized test. And even the essays, an essay receiving the top score could be written by anyone who knows what College Board is looking for: a clear, well-defined thesis, stated examples that are explained to be relevant to the thesis, and a strong conclusion. So I know that we are right at the ending time here, but one, I want to thank everyone for that light speed route we took through the English Lang and Lit exams. And I certainly hope everyone here this afternoon was able to pick up something about the test that they might be able to apply. I don't know what our procedure is, Kelsey, if we need to just immediately hit end. If you do have a question, I am certainly here for it, but I will let Kelsey take things away from there.
Thank you. Let's give it up for Ken. Thank you so much for such a wonderful overview of those exams. Last call for questions. Otherwise, we are going to have to end the series. But thank you all for giving us an hour of your evening today, and best of luck as you prepare for those big exams rolling up.
Yes. You're welcome, Shima, Anna, Shanda, Sophie, Liani, Rosangeli. You guys were great. You guys were very patient and allowed us to get through a lot of content that we had to get through. So really, we wish all of you the best of luck with your preparations. And do make sure to go back to Mahan's question earlier. Do make sure that you have a plan for prep, and do make sure that you are seeking out resources that are going to help give you this information from a very baseline way, working up to the most advanced things you'll see.
That's a great place to end it. Thank you, everybody.